Welcome back to Ben Keenan Just Can't Stop Talking. We are officially at the first deep dive that we've done on this podcast. And for better or for worse, we are talking about the Trump administration and his cabinet picks this week on our deep dive. I know this looks a little bit like a different setup, but that's because I've got some trusty laptops in front of me to give me all the information that you need to know. Basically, what we're doing today is we're going to run through the people that he has chosen and the people that he has said he wants to choose pending Senate confirmation. So what we will do is just run through in the order that they were announced. So you have a little bit of a timeline of the chaos that is going to be ensuing, for the next possibly 4 years. Obviously, people resign, people don't get chosen by the Senate. Like, there are all sorts of, complications as to why somebody would not be here after I tell you who this person is now. But we will cross that bridge when we get there. So in case you're unaware, the way that it works is that Donald Trump, as the incoming president, has full control over selecting who he wants to work in his administration. And these are the people who effectively are doing everything in the country policy-wise, right? So think of Trump as the CEO of America and think of all of these cabinet positions and these appointees and whatever as kind of the vice presidents, executive vice presidents, senior vice presidents of the country. So they're the ones tasked with actually executing what the CEO wants, but the CEO is kind of the face of it, right? So Donald Trump is creating policy, but he actually is not the one deciding how it's written and implementing it. That is based off of the people that he has chosen here. So that is why it is important to know who is in the cabinet and the administration of the incoming president, as well as the current president. So the way it works in actually selecting these people to get them into these roles is it's pretty divided 50-50 on appointments. So people that he just chooses that he likes, they don't have to go through anything. It's like, I've hired you, done. And appointments that have to be confirmed by the Senate by 50 votes or more. So, for example, the Secretary of State, so the person who is going and doing all the diplomatic stuff across the world, talking to other countries, the Secretary of Defense, the person who's in charge of, the Army and the military and the Navy and whatever, right? Secretary of Agriculture, Labor, Veterans Affairs, all of those cabinet level positions are positions that the Senate has a say in, right? They are starting from day one saying, we are going to consent or not consent to putting this person in your cabinet. It helps basically say it's not going to be 100% yes men. That is going to be a little bit of a struggle with this Republican administration because Trump only wants yes men and the Senate seems to be full of yes men and yes women. So that is complicated. But the other side are going to be some of like the chief of staff who he's like, I'm choosing the person to help run my show, or, any of his like the policy assistants, right? Like people who are pretty much like the day-to-day helpers of Trump himself do not have to be confirmed by the Senate. The people who are in charge of the country have to be confirmed by the Senate. Does that make sense? Okay, and without further ado, let's get started, I guess. We're going to start just by ticking through, like I said earlier, the order in which Trump announced these people because it creates kind of the story, the narrative of Trump in his mind. There are some characters throughout. So we're going to throw some information your way, but also some of them are just going to be passing kind of all right, well, I guess that's fine. I mean, I disagree with a lot of what the Republican Party stands for, just as a whole, but I do not necessarily disagree with 100% of the choices simply because any regular administration would make similar choices, even though I think the people personally are gross and annoying, does not mean that a George Bush, a Mitt Romney, when he was running, a John McCain wouldn't make the exact same decision. So I'm trying to look at it with that lens of this is actually actively bad versus I'm annoyed, but fine, I guess. So first up, we have Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles. Fun fact, she is actually the first woman ever to hold this role as a chief of staff to a president, which that's part of the thing that I say is annoying to me, where it's there are so many qualified women out there who could have held this role earlier, and it's annoying that it took this long. It's also annoying that Trump got to be the one to give the woman the first woman this role. She is his co-campaign manager from this election, so she obviously managed the hell out of him because he didn't seem nearly as crazy as he normally does. So I think in order to manage the next 4 years, it's smart to have her as the chief of staff, aka his, it's not a personal assistant, but kind of his right-hand woman. Next, we have Tom Homan, and this is where the kind of character drama already starts. He is the former director of ICE, so Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which are the people who do all the mass deportations. And he is now tasked as being Trump's border czar, which is a position that he does not have to have confirmation for. He can just be in that role, much like a Susie Wiles. He can just pick, right? In our graphics, what you'll see, we haven't made it this far yet, but you'll see anything that has a yellow title is something that the Senate has to confirm. Anything in a white title is just like they're appointed. So he's got this role as border czar, and his job is going to be implementing these mass deportation efforts that Trump has been touting at like every single rally, and people were chanting like mass deportation or deport them now or whatever the hell they were chanting at the RNC.
The fact is, and I'll say it now, you have to get them the hell out. You have to get them out. I'm sorry.
Tom Homan is in charge of overseeing all of that and getting people out of the country. And there have been a lot of interviews recently where people have asked, hey, are you actually going to just deport all of these criminals, or are you looking at deporting anybody who is here illegally? And there have been interviews, and I'll play a couple, where Tom Homan has talked about like, well, obviously we're going to go after the criminals first. Okay, fine, all fine and good. And he goes, but I need you to remember that if you are in this country illegally, you are a criminal.
Trump has made it clear. We will prioritize public safety threats and national security threats first. And that's what the focus will be. And there's over 1.5 convicted criminal aliens in this country with final orders removal that we're going to be looking for. There's thousands of gang members, illegal alien gang members we're going to be looking for. Now, I'm going to say, if you're in the country illegally, you shouldn't feel comfortable. Absolutely not. I won't feel comfortable if I'm in the country illegally. If I'm in some other country illegally, I'm not going to be comfortable. You shouldn't be comfortable either, because when you enter this country illegally, you have committed a crime. You are a criminal, and you're not off the table.
So your abuelita, who has been sitting at her house for the last 50 years, who came here as an undocumented immigrant and has been paying taxes and working and raising a family, and all of her family is 100% like born in the US, have jobs, are like fully members of society, they might pluck her up and be like, oh, I'm so sorry. You're actually going back to insert racist assumption of the country that she came from, right? So that is the dangerous thing that he is already staking in the ground before we've even started this, is that if you are here as an undocumented immigrant, regardless of whether you are the criminals, quote unquote, that Trump has been talking about, you are a criminal point blank. Additionally, when asked, hey, is there a way to do mass deportations without separating families, right? That was a big thing that was discussed during the Trump administration. The first time was the family separation policy that he had, the zero tolerance. Tom Homan straight up said, yeah, we can deport everybody together. You can all leave.
Is there a way to carry out mass deportation without separating families?
Of course there is. Families can be deported together.
And to me, that is truly one of the most fucked up things that I've heard. All right, next up, we have the first Senate confirmed position with Elise Stefanik, the Republican congresswoman from New York, being put up as the United Nations ambassador. This is just one of the ones where I think Elise Stefanik is annoying, but like, fine. Okay, anybody else could have also made this appointment, and it's just going to be annoying day in and day out because she just wants a lot of camera time. It is what it is. But moving back to annoying just appointment and also dangerous, we have Stephen Miller, who is big anti-immigrant guy, very like, if you're white, you're American type of energy. You've seen Stephen Miller. He is being appointed as the White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy. He's the former policy advisor under Trump's first administration. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he was part of the family separation, like very like pro family separation, but he's also been named Homeland Security advisor. So he is now in charge of discussing Homeland Security broadly. So he has a voice in immigration, and he's also the White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy. So this man just got appointed. Nobody has any say at all about this. So our next Senate appointment is going to be Lee Zeldin, a former New York representative, congressman, Republican, the whole nine yards, right? He ran for governor, I think, against Kathy Hochul. So in this most recent election for New York governor, obviously, he lost because Kathy Hochul became the first woman governor from New York. He has been put up as the EPA administrator, the Environmental Protection Agency. So he's in charge of doing all of the environmental protections for the US. I think he has like a lifetime record of like 14% from the people who track this, right? It's kind of like, you know how the NRA gives like scores like A, B, C, D, E, F, depending on like what you support for gun rights, as if guns have rights. This is the equivalent of environmental safety and concern and protection. So somebody who doesn't necessarily give one rat's ass about the environment is now being put up for the role of the EPA administrator. So that should be fun. We have another congressman next. Congressman Mike Waltz, a Republican out of Florida, has been nominated as the White House National Security Advisor. This is one of the ones that I think I can't be mad at generally, because I saw people on both sides being like, hey, this is actually like a patriot in like the original term, not like in the MAGA term, a patriot to the country. And this will actually be somebody who's really good and like his family's good, just broad good people. And I'm like, okay, I mean, if you say so. Speaking of Florida and speaking of annoying, Senator Marco Rubio, a Republican senator out of Florida, has been nominated as the Secretary of State. So his job is going to be going around the world and basically doing diplomacy broadly. I don't know if you follow the Biden administration, but Antony Blinken is the one who currently has this role, and he's spending a lot of time, for example, in Israel, trying to figure out the Israeli Gaza, Hezbollah, if you're going up to Lebanon, like the whole like international peace idea. So Marco Rubio is going to be in charge of keeping the peace, basically. Interesting thing here is, once again, he's just like an appointment that any other person would make. He ran for president against Trump the first time in 2016. He's, qualified, I guess. Trump campaigned on the idea that we are not going to start any more wars. We are going to be friends with Russia, but also fuck China, but also, this, that, and the other, right? It's going to be peace under Trump. Marco Rubio is what they call a China hawk, and he is really like gung-ho on making sure China does not get any more power. What worries me is all of this conversation that people are having around whether they're China being they here, trying to reabsorb Taiwan, which is operating independently from China, but Hong Kong was doing the same thing. But then there were some like very pro-Beijing people who ended up in the Hong Kong government, and now it's a little less what it used to be. And people are worried about the same thing with Taiwan. Like if they go to war and like there's this thing, it'll be really interesting to see Marco Rubio in this position. Not to say that he can't do that, just saying that a lot of people who deluded themselves into believing that Trump was going to be a peacetime president, this appointment might speak otherwise. Next, we have Scott Bessent, who is the founder of Key Square Group, which is a big investment firm. He has been selected as the Treasury Secretary, so the person in charge of all of your money. As people on Twitter were pointing out, this guy, Scott Bessent, is the guy that Trump was shouting out in every stump speech that he was doing, because the incoming Treasury Secretary attributed the strong stock market to Trump's poll numbers. So he basically was saying like Biden doesn't get any credit for the economy. It's because the poll numbers for Trump are so strong that the stock market is good. So basically he kissed the ring and he's being rewarded with a position as Treasury Secretary. Next, we have South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem. She is a Republican who has been selected for the Homeland Security Secretary. The interesting thing to me, and this might have nothing to do with anything, is that Kristi Noem, I think, knew she was going to get a position in this cabinet after she wasn't selected. She's the woman who shot her dog. Do you remember that news cycle? There was a lot of conversations about how she took her dog out back and shot him. She was on Trump's VP shortlist because she's very pretty. It's very much Trump's style to pick somebody who is like straight out of central casting. They look good on camera. They're able to, talk on his behalf, whatever. It was the news cycle that she shot her dog. Obviously, she then disappeared off that shortlist very quickly for vice presidential candidate. But it's not surprising that she was then given a position in the cabinet, especially because she was down at the border like pretty consistently. And the interesting thing to me is that South Dakota is pretty much as far away from the border as the southern border that you can get. Notice she never really went to the northern border up in Canada or, borders over here on the west or east coast. But it feels very specific to me that she spent a lot of time down there, almost as though somebody was like, hey, I can't make you vice president, but I can make you the Secretary of Homeland Security. Next, we have Mike Huckabee. He is the former governor of Arkansas. And yes, Sarah Huckabee Sanders' father, who is the current governor of Arkansas and Trump's former press secretary. She was the one that literally was just like yelling and talking shit to reporters all the time. Anyway, he is going to be the ambassador to Israel. We then have Bill McGinley, who is Trump's former cabinet secretary, the person who's the secretary for the cabinet itself, who has been selected as the White House counsel. So basically being Trump's lawyer as he's in the White House. And then we have Steve Witkoff, who has been selected as the special envoy to the Middle East. So the idea is that he is going to be the person who is keeping the peace over in the Middle East, whatever. Following that, we have John Ratcliffe, who was Trump's former director of national intelligence. Trump has selected him as the CIA director. Are you ready? We have another controversial take. Ding a ding a ding a ding a ding a ding a ding. Pete Hegseth, who is a former veteran. He, pretty well decorated, and Fox News weekend host, has been selected as the Secretary of Defense. Now, this was surprising to quite a few people, and I'm going to give you just the upfront confusing and shocking portion, and then you'll hear more about Pete Hegseth as this podcast goes on, because as things happen, more news came out about him that made it really, unsure whether he was actually going to be confirmed by the Senate. So first and foremost, being a Fox News host is not, disqualifying, but that's his current role. Outside of that, what he has done was he was in the Army. And so it's really interesting that that is his entire resume. Army vet, not like super high, to Fox News weekend host, is now in charge of 2 million people at the Secretary of Defense. Like, he's in charge, the head of the military, the Navy, the Air Force, he is the guy, but he's never held a managerial position. And now he's tasked with running one of the most important departments. And then, not to be outdone by that, he straight up said, just like 5 days after he was selected, I straight up just saying we should not have women in combat roles.
I'm straight up just saying we should not have women in combat roles. It hasn't made us more effective, hasn't made us more lethal, has made fighting more complicated. We've all served with women and they're great. It just, our institutions don't have to incentivize that in places where not traditionally, over human history, men in those positions are more capable.
A significant portion of the military broadly, all of the branches, are women, extremely talented women. And he thinks, as the manager of 2 million people, say 50% are women, right? He's straight up saying that 1 million of these people are no longer qualified because he doesn't think that women should be in combat roles. Like, I understand that all of those 1 million are in combat roles, but he's saying that none of you are qualified to do this. That is not somebody you want as your boss. So that's just number one. People are like, I just don't think that he's extremely well qualified. But once again, Trump sees him on Fox News and therefore is like, oh my God, that's my guy. Okay, moving on. Speaking of crazy, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. You know Elon from Tesla and from being the richest man in the world. And Vivek was the one who ran against Trump in the primary, but kissed his ass every single day in the primary. So it's kind of like, were you ever really running against him? He's like, I have absolutely nothing against Trump. I would love for Trump to win, but I'm running just because kind of silly. Anyway, they have been assigned because the weird thing, let me try to figure out a way to describe this. Departments, the Department of Education, the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, all have to actually be created by Congress. That's not something the president can just create and get rid of by himself. He has assigned Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy to be the heads of the Department of Government Efficiency, where they want to go in and basically strip trillions of dollars out of our national budget annually, which obviously is going to start with veterans healthcare, because that's the biggest one, the biggest bill on our, we'll talk about that in a minute. The interesting parts here, one, these are appointed positions because this department has never been created by Congress. Doesn't mean it won't be, but right now it's a make-believe department. Elon Musk named this department the Department of Government Efficiency. And what's really funny to me is Vivek Ramaswamy every single day fucking talks about how unelected bureaucrats are the reason that our country is in shambles, quote unquote. Whereas he now is rolling into a role where he is an unelected bureaucrat. Your entire job at the Department of Government Efficiency is going to be to slash the budget. But guess what? No one elected you to do this. You were assigned to do this like every other person who are in these roles. Next up, we have Dan Scavino, Trump's former senior advisor during his first administration, who has been placed as the assistant to the president and another deputy chief of staff. There are quite a few which will report into Susie Wiles, who is the chief of staff, but these people are all tasked with different things, policy or personnel or communications or whatever the fuck it might be. And then James Blair, which is Trump campaign advisor, but also the RNC political director, was assigned as assistant to the president and deputy chief of staff for legislative, political, and public affairs. See, this is what I mean. And then finally, we have Taylor Butowich, is that how you pronounce it? Who was in charge of the Save America PAC, so another Trump person, and the CEO of MAGA Inc., which is a super PAC for Trump's reelection. He is going to be the assistant to the president and deputy chief of staff for communications and personnel. Gird your loins because we've got another controversial pig. Ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling. Tulsi Gabbard, former Hawaii representative congresswoman, Democrat, who ran to be the president of the Democratic nomination in 2020 against Biden. You remember all these videos of her, debating Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg. Well, she kind of went nutty off the deep end, became like a Fox person, really just kind of red pilled, right? She's like fully like, oh my God, like these Democrats are trying to ruin the country. Shove off. Anyway, so she has been selected as the director of national intelligence. Basically, like this person is in charge of all of the intelligence we get. So like from our allies in like France or Canada or the UK or Japan or, anywhere in Germany or, South America, whatever it might be. She's supposed to get intelligence to keep us safe. The wild part of this is for a very long time, people have been calling her a Russian asset and an Assad apologist. He is in charge of Syria. So basically it was this whole shtick where back in the day, Hillary Clinton said something in an interview about how the Democratic Party has an asset of Russia within the party and that they were compromised. And it was pretty well known that Tulsi Gabbard was probably that person because she was also, when she was in Congress, she went to Syria and met with Assad, like didn't tell anybody, came back and was like, there's nothing, there are no crimes against the people happening there. And she was really like an apologist about it all. So when she was named this position, there were Russia propaganda accounts that were applauding this and calling her their girlfriend. And it was like, it's very obvious that she has a weird connection, regardless of what title you feel comfortable calling it. There's no reason that the person who is so sympathetic to Russia and Syria should be in a role where national intelligence is at stake. Because what if somebody shared information and then she shared it? What if Ukraine during this war shared information with Tulsi Gabbard and she was like, oh, like I'll just tell Putin. I mean, that's whatever. And then it's like, okay, well, suddenly Ukraine is now being invaded from a different location. Like that's insane. And many, many people have spoken out against this from both sides of the aisle. We will continue to talk about this as more will come up in this timeline and I will give you an update. Another controversial pig, ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling, Congressman Matt Gaetz, a Republican out of Florida, has been selected as the Attorney General. This is the same Matt Gaetz that got Kevin McCarthy kicked out of the Speaker role of the House. Also the same Matt Gaetz who is under investigation with the Congressional Ethics Committee for sex trafficking a minor and having sex with a minor.
And I'll give you the truth why I'm not Speaker. It's because one person, a member of Congress, wanted me to stop an ethics complaint because he slept with a 17-year-old. An ethics complaint that started before I ever became Speaker.
He wasn't even on the short list, but after some flight, I guess, that he took with Trump, they came off the plane and suddenly Matt Gaetz was the nominee. So, as if that wasn't crazy enough, we are going back to Pete Hegseth, the choice for the Department of Defense, so the Secretary of Defense. It came out that he has quite a few tattoos that, nothing against tattoos, I have tattoos myself, that show Christian nationalist sayings and symbols. The tattoos were such an issue that he actually wasn't allowed to be on protective duty during Biden's inauguration. So this is the man who's going to run our defense. He has never managed anything but upwards towards 2 million people. And now people are concerned about his Christian nationalist tattoos, even though he says that's not what they are and there's something else. Like, there's pretty clear evidence that this is exactly what they are. Another crazy pick. Ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling. Crazy, but not crazy at the same time. We knew it was going to happen, but it's absolutely insane. RFK Jr., the environmental lawyer who challenged Biden during the primary this year, but then turned into an independent when he realized nobody in the Democratic Party wanted to vote for him, but was running at like anywhere between like 7 and 14% of the national poll, but he was pulling away from a lot of Trump supporters. So then he fully just like dropped out and endorsed Trump. And we all heard that video of him negotiating for a cabinet position when he was on the phone with Trump in order to give Trump his endorsement. Anyway, he was selected for the Secretary of Health and Human Services, which is interesting solely because he's an anti-vaxxer and a conspiracy theorist. He thinks that fluoride in water makes your kids gay. He thinks that vaccines cause autism. He thinks that there are, the 5G waves in the air are, harming. He thinks that there's an epidemic of big pharma and that the reason we're all obese is because people are being intentionally poisoned. It's just, this man is an absolute nut and he should be absolutely nowhere near anything that has to do with our healthcare policy. And now he's in charge of the department that oversees the CDC. So the people who, helped us during the pandemic. He's overseeing the Food and Drug Administration. He's overseeing the National Institute of Health. Like, this man should not be in charge of all of this. He's an actual conspiracy theorist, let alone forget about the fact that during the reason he was losing so much support during his own campaign run is news came out that he found a dead bear cub on the side of the road, put it in his car, took it, and dropped it in Central Park. He once cut off the head of a dead whale. He has a brain worm, a worm living in his brain. This man is not sane and not well. He's also had multiple affairs. It's just, why? It feels like Trump is intentionally choosing these people who are scandal-ridden to deflect for some future shit that he's doing, because I don't think he's choosing them because they're scandal-ridden. I think he's choosing them because they're easy targets, like he did the first time around, to be like, it's their fault, you're fired. It's their fault, you're fired. It's their fault, you're fired. And he has to take no accountability for anything that he has going on. All right, back to the normal order of business. Todd Blanche, Trump's former lawyer, has been selected to be the Deputy Attorney General. Doug Collins, the former Republican Georgia representative who ran for a Senate seat against someone and lost in the primary, it doesn't matter because we have 2 Democrat senators in Georgia at the moment. He's going to be in charge of Veterans Affairs as the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. Another Trump lawyer, Dean John Sauer, who repped Trump before the Supreme Court, has been selected to be the Solicitor General. And then another former Trump primary opponent, Governor Doug Burgum out of North Dakota, another Republican who dropped out and endorsed Trump, has been selected as the Secretary of the Interior. Okay, we're back to Pete Hegseth, the Department of Defense choice for secretary. Reports came out that he had a sexual assault allegation launched against him. Not only does this man have no experience, once again, managing 2 million people, he also possesses multiple Christian nationalist tattoos. He also has been charged with sexual assault allegations. Okay, moving on. We have Stephen Chung, who is the campaign spokesperson for Trump, also the former UFC spokesperson. He has a spokesperson experience. I really don't care where it came from. I just thought that was interesting because Trump's a big UFC fan. He has been appointed as the White House Communications Director. Additionally, Caroline Leavitt, who was the campaign's national press secretary and the former assistant White House press secretary during Trump's first term, has been appointed as the press secretary for this Trump term. I think she's 27, somewhere in there, which makes her, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the youngest press secretary we've ever had. Next, another Senate appointment position. We have Chris Wright, who is the CEO of Liberty Energy, so a big energy company, has been appointed as Secretary of Energy. Shocking. And of course, we are going back to Pete Hegseth again, because I told you, it's not going to be an easy ride nor an easy confirmation for him. Olivia Troy, who was Vice President Mike Pence's former Homeland Security advisor, posted on Twitter, quote, Pete Hegseth's tattoos are the ones that white nationalists get. Federal law enforcement know these symbols well. Hegseth was banned from National Guard duty at Biden's inauguration for those tattoos. The Senate should consider this disqualifying for a nominee for Secretary of Defense. So there you go. When I said it was bipartisan, that people are speaking out against this, I wasn't joking at all. At this point in our timeline, 5 personal lawyers of Trump have been selected to work in the White House. Something tells me that he is he's planning to not follow the rules, is my guess, and that he needs people who are already really good at defending him. And in case you were worried that we didn't come back to Pete Hegseth quick enough, reports came out after Olivia Troy put that tweet that a President-elect Donald Trump's defense secretary pick, Pete Hegseth, paid a woman who accused him of sexual assault in a settlement agreement that included a confidentiality clause. So they settled the assault allegations, which doesn't necessarily feel like something that somebody who is innocent would do. To me, doesn't feel like that to me. Next, Brendan Carr, who is the author of the FCC portion of Project 2025, has been nominated by Trump as the FCC chair. So the person who wrote the FCC portion of Project 2025 is now going to be in charge of the FCC. I think we should take some time and go read up on what that chapter said, so maybe we're aware of what's coming down the pike. I know he has said in previous interviews that he wants to take a look at revoking, I think it's CBS and NBC licenses because they spoke with Kamala Harris and didn't give equal time to Trump. It's all giving very petty. For what? Also, this is a good time to remind ourselves that Trump swore left, right, and center he had no connection to people at Project 2025. He had no idea what it was. There were a lot of Trump supporters who were saying the same thing in every comment section that I have. He's Agenda 47 all the way. It's the same fucking thing. And you know now that Trump was lying to you because he's hiring people who wrote these chapters into his administration. Oh, and just in case I forgot to mention this, because it came out about the same time his border czar, Tom Homan, actually wrote the border section of Project 2025 as well. So now we have two authors who are coming in and don't need to be confirmed by the Senate. We now have Sean Duffy. If that name rings any bells, you might be of a certain age. He was in The Real World. He was also a former Wisconsin congressman, and he's a current Fox News host. Well, he has been nominated to be the Secretary of Transportation. I don't know what qualifications he has for that. I don't think, if I'm correct here, that he was even on the Transportation Committee when he was in Congress. But I mean, I guess people could say the same thing about Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who is now Secretary Pete Buttigieg, who is the head of the Department of Transportation. All right, next up, we have Howard Lutnick. He is the Cantor Fitzgerald CEO, which is, I think, another investment firm. I don't know. He was also the co-chair of the Trump Transition Committee. He has been selected for the Secretary of Commerce. He was the one that told folks consistently that No. RFK Jr. is not going to be put at Health and Human Services. So, I mean, I think we can trust everything this man says for the next 4 years, right? Okay, at this point in time, we're going back to Matt Gaetz and all of his allegations of, sex trafficking and having sex with minors and his ethics committee form, right? So there have been calls by Democrats and some Republicans to release the ethics committee report, right? So basically, as soon as he was nominated, Matt Gaetz resigned from Congress, where the report was going to come out 3 days later. And he claimed oh my God, well, I'm no longer a member of Congress. I'm now a private citizen. You can't release that report, right? Speaker Mike Johnson was not weighing in. And then all of a sudden he was no, you shouldn't release it, which made it even more suspicious because people came out saying that there were things in there that were damning enough that they don't want it released. And then we realized maybe we should release all of this stuff if the person's going to be the Attorney General, the Chief Justice Officer of the United States. Maybe we should know a little bit about his sex trafficking and, having sex with underage girls. Just generally, maybe we should know about that. Well, hackers got impatient and decided that they were going to hack the ethics report. And according to, I'm reading this from the Seattle Times, a hacker has gained access to a file shared among lawyers whose clients have given damaging testimony related to President-elect Trump's Attorney General nominee, Matt Gaetz. So this was kind of the big push to be we should know about this. And if you're not going to show us, we will find out for ourselves because something's being covered up here. So that's where Matt Gaetz is in this whole timeline. We're on, November 18th at this point, November 19th, somewhere in there. But not to be outdone by the crazy or the lunacy, Trump has nominated Dr. Oz, Mehmet Oz, who ran against John Fetterman out of the Pennsylvania Senate race a couple years ago. He's also the TV doctor that you all know and hate. Dr. Oz has been named the head of the Medicare and Medicaid services. So he is in charge of basically putting out that money for Medicare and Medicaid on behalf of the government, the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid. So CMS, if that helps you at all. I don't think Trump knows that he's highly unqualified to do this. I think he heard Medicaid and Medicare and thought doctor, and he went Dr. Oz. And I think in his tiny little pea brain, all of this was connected and nobody felt like telling him, hey, so this is actually arguably one of the most important departments that somebody could could work in. And this man is wholly unqualified to do this in general. He's been a TV doctor hawking weight loss pills for the past, 20 years. Yeah, he's a full surgeon, but like, how is that going to help him shell out Medicaid and Medicare to the people across the country that need it, you know? And in case we forget the type of guy that Dr. Oz is, he once said that uninsured Americans have, quote, no right to health in America. Okay, we're taking a time out in Dr. Oz land to go back to Pete Hegseth land. Ding, 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 we're back again. He appeared on a Christian nationalist podcast on November 19th, where he talked about the idea of classical Christian schools providing recruits for an underground army that will eventually launch an, quote, educational insurgency across the nation. Tell me again how those tattoos are not Christian nationalist, Pete. All right, let's move over to the Department of Education, where Linda McMahon has been nominated. She is the former Small Business Administration administrator from Trump's first administration, but more importantly, she's the former CEO for the WWE. Now, bear in mind that Linda McMahon has absolutely zero qualifications for being the Secretary of Education. I don't think she's ever served on a position where education was a key focus. I think there was a rumor that she actually served on the board of education somewhere, but she was kicked off. Oh, here it is. So Linda McMahon, Trump's pick for education secretary, resigned from a state education board. Jesus Christ. Shortly after a newspaper asked her about her false claim that she had an education degree. That's what it was. She wasn't fired. She didn't have a degree in education that she lied about, was asked about it, and then resigned from the state education board. This is our Secretary of Education, ladies and gentlemen. Either way, Linda, girl, it might just be a short-term job because they've said they want to get rid of the Department of Education. So I wouldn't get too comfortable warm in that chair. Next, if you remember from the first Trump admin, former acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker, well, he is now going to be Trump's ambassador to NATO, which we hate. Overall, it just kind of seems absurd because there's absolutely no proof that he actually has any foreign policy experience or any interest in NATO. I think what it is Trump needs a yes man because it's very clear, Trump has made it very clear, he wants the US to leave NATO. So I think the idea is putting somebody in there that's going to break so drastically the connection between US and the NATO alliance that we would just like, oh, it just doesn't work for us anymore. We're going to leave. I think that's probably the thinking there, is putting somebody incompetent in the position to tear down the thing that he does not want to be a part of. It's kind of like when your mom asks you to do the dishes as a child and you think, oh, if I do these bad, she won't ask me again. You know, it's kind of one of ththose things like if I put somebody in there and we don't participate well, maybe they'll just leave us alone and we won't become part of NATO anymore. In other Project 2025 news, Trump has asked Russ Vought, who was the architect, the actual person who was in charge of pulling together Project 2025, to be the director of the Office of Management and Budget. The person who's literally in charge of the office, the personnel, the money, the everything that's been addressed in Project 2025, this man is suddenly going to be in charge of. And what's really interesting is that I hope that because this is a position that he has to be approved by the Senate. If the Democrats were worth one fraction of the money that we pay them, they will be harping, you have said this, you have said this, you have said this, you have said this, all in Project 2025, who Trump claimed he didn't know anything about. He said he didn't know you, you've never heard of you, never met you, whatever. You are now in charge of management and budget for this entire office. Explain to us why we should give you full power to basically tear down the entire federal government, which is what Project 2025 in part is trying to do. It's trying to push everything back to the states. He wants the people in the government to be loyal to Trump only, not to the Constitution, not to the job, they want Trump to become a king. This has become very clear, especially with Project 2025 being like the umbrella by which everything in this administration is going to be funneling through. Okay, and back in crazy Tulsi Gabbard DNI land, we have Meghan McCain, who has a picture posted with Tulsi Gabbard that says this woman is actively serving as lieutenant colonel in the army and has put her life on the line for all of us. The baseless slander is not only an abhorrent, but it's unpatriotic. Shame on all of you trafficking in these lies. America will be safer with her in the cabinet. So that's Meghan McCain. We all know Meghan McCain. But Nikki Haley released a statement on the same day that says, so now she's defended Russia, she's defended Syria, she's defended Iran, and she's defended China. No, she has not denounced any of these views. None of them. She hasn't hasn't taken one of them back. DNI, Department of National Intelligence. This is not a place for a Russian, Iranian, Syrian, Chinese sympathizer. DNI has to analyze real threats. Are we comfortable with someone like that at the top of our national intelligence agencies? Here's the thing. You know that meme when the worst person you know makes a good point? I don't think Nikki Haley's the worst person I know. I think she's one of the most spineless, but this is a good point. Do we want somebody like that in charge of our national intelligence? No. Meghan McCain, like the whole idea, like she's a lieutenant colonel. Guess what? You could be in any position and still be unqualified for a job just because you have a title. Like, imagine if I was the CFO of a company. Great title. And what you've asked me to do is go on and become the head of America's Next Top Model. Explain how that, just because I have a title somewhere, that translates into something else. Nobody would take me seriously because I'm not qualified for the role and I shouldn't be there. Just because I'm good at one thing, just because she was good at being in the army, does not mean she should be in charge of national intelligence. Okay, and another shocking appointment, Representative Lori Chavez de Remer, who is a Republican congresswoman out of Oregon, who took over for one term. I think she was only for, 2 years from a Democrat, and then she just lost re-election to a different Democrat, and her entire gig on the national stage was 2 years as a congresswoman in Oregon. She is now going to be Trump's labor secretary, and the reason that this is interesting is because the unions like her. The Teamsters president, Sean O'Brien, congratulated her. She was one of 6 Republican members in the House to sign a letter saying that she would respect the results of the 2024 election. Like, she doesn't sound like a complete asshat. I don't, how did this sneak through? Okay, and ring-a-ding-ding, we're going back with some crazy updates. Matt Gaetz has actually withdrawn his nomination. So he is no longer in Congress this term. He's no longer in Congress next term, and he will not be the Attorney General. So he is gone. But time will see if we still get to see the ethics report. We should, because it was created by taxpayer dollars. And I think we should understand what former Congressman Matt Gaetz, had up his little sleeve in case he wants to run for office again. But that is another story for another day. But once again, going back to Pete Hegseth, because this man cannot catch a fucking break. He was asked by a reporter, did you sexually assault a woman in Monterey, California? Pete's response, I have, as far as the media is concerned, it's very simple. The matter was fully investigated and I was completely cleared, and that's where I'm going to leave it. So that's not necessarily true just because you settled. But also, now that Matt Gaetz is gone, you're kind of the prime target to be voted down by the Senate, because they could only ever vote down like 2 to 3 people, right? Matt took himself out. Gaetz is gone. The trash taken itself out. Now, Pete, you, my friend, are kind of in the spotlight. So I don't know. Now, with Matt Gaetz dropping out, there were rumors swirling about who some of these choices should be, who they could be. Well, Trump landed on former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi. Just generally, it's not shocking that he would pick somebody from Florida, and it's not shocking that he would pick, a former attorney general. That just makes sense somehow. It's not like objectively the worst decision that could have been made. Like Ken Paxton coming out of Texas could have been probably one of the worst decisions that could have been made. Rudy Giuliani, I guess, could have been a historically bad decision. Pam Bondi, however, she's just like historically bad at everything. So like she didn't enforce Florida's minimum wage law. She had an execution rescheduled in Florida so that she could go to a campaign fundraiser. There are rumors that she actually stopped investigating Trump University when a giant donation was made to her campaign. Like, it's just like, she's just like old school corrupt, it's like she's currently a lobbyist for, the top Trump fundraiser. That's just old school corruption. Like, hey, you're getting a little bit of a kickback here, but I guess it could be actively worse. She just seems as though she's kind of in it for the money and for protecting Trump, as opposed to like actively destroying the rest of the country. I guess that's a small victory if we're counting the small ones too. Trump has announced his second ambassadorship pick, the ambassador to Canada, which will be Pete Hoekstra. He is a former Michigan Republican congressman, but also the current Michigan GOP chair. 2 things are really interesting to me. One, Michigan is doing historically poorly for Republicans at present, right? Like they just lost a seat that should have been winnable in the Senate when Trump won the state of Michigan. But I guess Trump really doesn't give a fuck about other people besides himself. So he's probably like, good job for winning the state for me. But also, now that Trump put all of these tariffs on Canada and Mexico, it'll be really interesting to see how the ambassador to Canada actually engages with that. So it's like, not only did he fail his way up by not doing well in the Michigan GOP races statewide for the past how many cycles, also it's like now you have the job of like not ruining our entire relationship with Canada over these tariffs. After rumors that Trump was going to select billionaire and former senator from Georgia, Kelly Loeffler, for the Secretary of Agriculture gig, he actually gave it to Brooke Rollins, who is the CEO of Trump's America First Policy Institute. Once again, good old-fashioned pocket dipping, bringing people from all of these places that belong to you and do exactly what you want. And going back to more Tulsi Gabbard news, because I told you it's a timeline, on November 22nd, it was announced that Tulsi Gabbard, Trump's pick for Director of National Intelligence, was briefly placed on a TSA list that prompts additional security screening after her overseas travel pattern and foreign connections triggered a government algorithm earlier this year. Now you see why people like Nikki Haley, who was literally the ambassador to the UN. So it's like she has foreign experience, said that she should not be allowed in these positions of national intelligence when she is so cozy with Iran and Russia and Syria and China. It's just giving bad news. In other news that shouldn't shock you, Trump nominated as the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, so you probably have heard it as HUD, Scott Turner, who was a former NFL player who went on to be a former state politician in Texas and then worked in the first Trump administration as the first executive director of the White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council, helping to lead an unprecedented effort that transformed our country's most distressed communities. I don't know. It's fine. So keeping it moving, we have Marty McCary as the FDA commissioner. We have former Florida Congressman and physician Dave Weldon as the director of the CDC. And we have Dr. Jeanette Neshiwat as the Surgeon General. So all doctors that don't necessarily have squeaky clean views of medicine. Trump has selected Alex Wong for a Deputy National Security Advisor role. He was the former Trump Deputy Assistant Secretary for East Asian and Pacific Affairs in the first administration. Like, it's, once again, just a classic Republican pick. There are now 9 current or former Fox News hosts and guests that Trump has pulled into this administration already. So that's where he thinks expertise lies. Okay, Trump has announced that Kevin Hassett, who was the architect of the 2017 tax cuts for it was like 1 point something trillion dollars for those billionaires. Well, now he's going to be the director of the National Economic Council, because that makes perfect sense since he wants to give more tax cuts to more billionaires. So he named Jameson Greer as the U.S. Trade Representative. He named Vance allies, I don't know, aides, I guess, technically, James Braid as the Legislative Affairs Director, Matt Brasso as the Political Affairs Director, Alex Latcham as the Public Liaison Director. And then as we go back to people who are wholly unqualified for the jobs that they're in, he announced that John Phelan, his nominee for the Secretary of the Navy. However, he has absolutely zero relevant experience for the job other than having hosted a fundraising dinner for Trump at his $38 million home in Aspen. He's an art collector who runs a private equity firm. You think the people in the Navy are going to get pissed off about this? Because I do, personally. Vince Haley has been announced as the domestic policy director. Sebastian Gorka, who was actually Trump's former senior director for counterterrorism in his first administration, is actually going to have the same job now and has also been promoted to special assistant to the president, which is like, I think, one of the higher roles that you can get, one of the higher titles for somebody who doesn't have to be directly confirmed for anything. So watch out, terrorists. He has also nominated Jay Bhattacharya as the director of the National Institute of Health. Interestingly enough, as I'm seeing online, I didn't know this, that technically he has an MD, but is not licensed to practice medicine as he never completed a residency. So do with that information what you will. Notoriously, he was a lockdown during the pandemic truther, and he pushed back against lockdowns, and all of his ideas were considered fringe, but of course, now he's going to be in charge of the National Institute of Health, which I think is what Dr. Fauci was in charge of. So it's like we're just going the opposite direction, which is classic Trump. I don't know. And then finally, we have Jim O'Neill, who is a longtime associate of Peter Thiel, who, for those of you that don't recognize that name, he's, I think, a Silicon Valley, uber wealthy billionaire. He was the one who funded J.D. Vance's Senate race. He's now going to be the deputy Secretary of Health and Human Services. So he's basically going to work hand in hand with RFK Jr. So what's interesting to me is they bring in nutty RFK Jr. and then what they do is they bring somebody who is wholly unqualified for this job. He's just an associate, a longtime associate of Peter Thiel in here to kind of do Peter Thiel's bidding. Whereas like, I think that it's going to be a lot of the, push RFK Jr. through, push this, deputy secretary through. I would put money on the fact that RFK Jr. gets fired and then this guy returns as acting because he wouldn't have been approved by the Senate as a full-time secretary without that title just because it does not appear to have any relevant experience. But once again, that's wholly unsurprising in a Trump administration. And there you have it. If every single person is approved by the Senate, which I do not think that they will be, that's who we'll have for the next 4 years or the next, however many years until people resign, because every couple of years people resign from these posts and you get somebody objectively worse and nuttier because nobody's going to know that they're even being replaced in those positions. But I hope you learned something. I learned it too much, some would argue, as I was doing the research for this. But nevertheless, we persist, and I will see you in the next episode where we are back with the classic news of the week. Per usual, be sure to subscribe both on YouTube and Apple Podcasts or Spotify, depending on if you want to listen to me, see me both. I'm also on social media at Ben Keenan on Instagram, at I've Been Traveling on TikTok. I'm using Threads more, so you can find me there. I talk a lot more politics there than I do anywhere else, probably. Yeah, until next time. Thanks.